Aristotle's History of Animals. This is our second class meeting for this study. Let's get our notes ready. At the top of your notes, write your name and the date. Today is March 31st. Title of our course, we're studying Aristotle's History of Animals. Aristotle's History of Animals. This is our second, this is our second class meeting, but this is still lesson 1. So we're in lesson 1. And this is class number 2. There are no titles for these individual lessons in the book, so we're just going to refer to it as lesson 2. In our first class, we talked about natural philosophy. It's the third part of philosophy, or third branch of philosophy. We said there is rational philosophy, moral philosophy, and natural philosophy. Natural philosophy divides into physics and metaphysics. Natural philosophy divides into physics and metaphysics. Both of these are studied in the writings of Aristotle. It's difficult for us, though, to study Aristotle, so to prepare ourselves for the study of Aristotle, we start with a simpler subject that's called natural history. In the study of natural philosophy, we seek to understand the principles. In natural philosophy, we study to learn the principles of the natural world, of things in motion, of living things, moving things. In natural history, we simply seek to collect information. We just gain knowledge about what exists in the natural world. So we can think of natural history simply as collecting observations that are organized, classified knowledge. In our last class, I added the term classification of knowledge. We don't just want a million facts bouncing all around in our head. We'd like to have some kind of classification. Organized information. All right? That's what we seek through natural history, and there's two different branches of natural history. We can study animals. We can study plants. And we've got some great sources for this. We've got a book on the history of animals written by Aristotle. And we've got a history of plants written by Theophrastus. Theophrastus, who was Aristotle's successor. He took over Aristotle's teaching position when Aristotle died. So we have two great books on natural history, Aristotle's History of Animals and Theophrastus's History of Plants. It's also titled Inquiry into Plants. And then in addition to these, as a third popular source of natural history, we study Pliny. Pliny's Natural History, which is useful because Pliny's natural history, both Aristotle and Theophrastus are Greeks. Pliny on the other hand, is a Roman who lived in the Roman Empire when Rome controlled the whole world, and Pliny gives us a summary of what was known about the natural world in the time of the Roman Empire, or in the time when the Christian church was being founded. It's very helpful. So that's a quick review of what we looked at in our first class, and a good introduction and review to natural history and this study of Aristotle's History of Animals. In our first class, we went through the first 6 paragraphs, the first 6 sections in Chapter 1, and in this class we're going to try to get through the rest of the chapter. All right, so we're picking up in section or paragraph 7 of Chapter 1, and I'm going to erase this. You need some more time? You need some more time for this? I'll leave it for a few. Okay, I'll leave it. All right, so let's look at paragraph 7. Just listen along if you're here. When we read paragraphs 1 through 6, we talked about the parts of animals, and we asked, why is Aristotle talking about the parts of animals? And we said, in order to classify animals, we have to find something to use to classify them. We can't classify animals by their color. We can't classify animals by their size. That doesn't make any sense. And the reasonable way to classify animals is by comparing their parts. By comparing their parts. And we said most animals have the same parts. They're not the same in all of their features, in all of their qualities, but we generally have the same parts. Or we have something that's similar to the same parts. We talked, for example, about how our hands are like the claws of a crab, right? A crab, the claws are like hands. So we can look at a crab and say, those are its hands. We don't mean that they're literally hands, but they're like hands. And we can see that our bodies can compare to one another because we have similar parts. And the parts of our bodies provide us with a way of classifying, comparing, and contrasting animals. What comparing and contrasting means? Comparing means explaining how things are similar. We should write that down. Compare and contrast. Compare means to explain how things are similar, and contrast means to examine how they're different. When we want to study two things, it's helpful for us to use comparison and contrasting. Compare and contrast. How are they similar? How are they different? If we said, how is a man like a horse? Let's compare man and horse. How are they similar? How can we compare them? We can say they have the same parts. They have legs. They have a head. They have eyes. They have a nose, mouth, ears. They have a spine. Right? We can compare man and horse and make a list of observations that are the same. But then we can contrast man and horse, and we can say horses have tails, men don't have tails. Horses have 4 legs, men only have 2 legs. Men stand upright, horses stand on 4 feet. And we can contrast the differences between men and horses. We can compare and we can contrast. That's a good way to study something. All right? Plus, what's also helpful about comparing and contrasting is that when we find something new, we can immediately start to kind of put it into a class with other things and have an idea of what it is. If you find an animal out on the farm or in the woods that you've never seen before, you can immediately start comparing it to other animals that you do know, right? You can say, it looks like a snake. It's like a snake, but I see it has legs. So it's not a snake. It compares to a snake. It's long and it's thin, but it contrasts with a snake because it has legs, and a snake doesn't have legs. So it's like a snake. It's not like a snake. What is that thing? It's like a gecko or a salamander, but it's bigger. It's the same size of a snake, but it has legs. So you can start comparing and contrasting, and as you build a classified knowledge of animals, you can quickly place new animals into a class by comparing and contrasting its parts with other animals. You see how that would work? Huh? You can immediately start comparing and contrasting. And that's how it helps to classify things. You know what it's like to see a snake and wonder what kind of snake is that? You start comparing and contrasting. What color is it? Where is it? What kind of head does it have? What kind of patterns or colors does it have? You know, you go through this comparing and contrasting. It looks like a copperhead, but it has this, but I saw it in the water, and it has a white mouth inside. You compare and contrast, right? You immediately start comparing and contrasting, and that helps you. Helps us to immediately start to gather information intelligently about new animals, all right? So comparing and contrasting. So we're going to pick up in paragraph 7. We were talking about aquatic animals. Remember that? We're talking about aquatic animals. We'll just pick up in paragraph 7. Actually, no, we're past that. Let me just find where we left off. I think we left off right where we got to terrestrial animals. Yeah. Paragraph 9, actually. Paragraph 9. So we talked about aquatic animals or animals in water, and we saw it's not so simple. It's not just that some animals live in water and some animals live on land. The animals that live in water differ. Some animals actually live in water and they never come out of water, like fish. Some animals get their food in the water. Other animals don't live in the water, but they get their food in the water, right? So we looked at, there's differences between aquatic animals. They compare in that they all are aquatic. They all live in water. They all have some relationship to the water, but they contrast in the ways that they live in water and what they use the water for and so on. So we see it's not so simple, and there are differences among aquatic animals. In the future, we're going to get into the study of those animals in more detail. But right now, we're just looking to learn about the parts and characteristics of animals so we can start to compare and contrast and build classified knowledge, which is science, all right? Now in paragraph 9, we're going to get started with land animals or terrestrial animals. So the first kind of animals we looked at, general grouping of animals, were aquatic animals. Now we're looking at land animals. Paragraph 9. Of land animals, some are furnished with wings. Some land animals that do not live or make use of water much, some land animals are furnished with wings, such as birds and bees. And these differ, so you see how it compares them? It says some have wings, like birds and bees. And these differ in other respects from each other, so they contrast. We compare and we contrast. They're like each other. If you were to look at birds and bees, you would compare them and say, what's the same? They both have wings. They're both land animals. They don't live in water. They have wings. But they're different in other things. Other land animals have feet. And of land animals that have feet, some walk, others crawl, others creep in the mud. So there are different kinds of land animals that have feet. Some walk, some crawl, others creep in the mud. There is no animal which has only wings, as fish have only fins. So fish have no legs, right? Fish have no legs, but they have fins. There's no bird that's like a fish, that only has wings, but doesn't have legs. And we don't usually think about the fact that birds have legs, right? They're winged land animals, but they also have legs. Fish have fins like birds have wings, but fish have no legs. Unless they're evolving, right? And then they start growing legs, and I'm just kidding, okay? So fish have no legs. Birds have wings and legs. There's no land animal which has wings but doesn't also have legs. Those animals whose wings are formed by an expansion of the skin can walk. The bat has feet, and a seal, which is a land animal but also goes into the water, but we also go into the water. That doesn't make us an aquatic animal, right? Seals have fins like a fish, or are they wings? We'll say they're fins because they swim, right? But they also have feet. So some animals that seem to almost be like in between the two, right? A bat has feet. A seal kind of almost has feet, not really. Aristotle says they have imperfect feet. Among birds, there are some with very imperfect feet, which are therefore called apodes, which means they don't have feet. They do have feet, they're just not perfect feet. They are, however, provided with very strong wings, and almost all birds that are similar to this have strong wings and imperfect feet, like the swallow. For all this class of birds is alike, both in their habits and in the structure of their wings, and their whole appearance is very similar. There's another bird. The name he gives is apos. There's a footnote which will tell us what that might be. Is seen at times of the year, but the drepanis can only be taken in rainy weather during the summer, and on the whole is a rare bird. So in paragraph 9, we talk about winged land animals, right? Winged land animals, some of them have feet. Their feet are not all the same. Some have imperfect feet that are not really good feet. They barely use them, okay? Others have more established feet. Paragraph 10, moving on with land animals. Many animals can both walk and swim. Many animals can both walk and swim. The following are the differences exhibited by animals in their habits and their actions. Now, this is helpful for us because we're going to get a little bit into the actual dispositions of animals, the personalities of animals. And this is helpful for us in the study of Aesop's fables, right? In Aesop's fables, we understand that animals have almost like personalities, right? If I say a fox, you know what that fox is like. If I say a sheep, you know that a sheep is like innocent and gentle, right? So we have these different personalities among animals. So Aristotle says, let's talk about the habits and actions of animals. Some of them are gregarious. What does gregarious mean? Gregarious, in normal use, gregarious means talkative. But that's not really what it means. It means they're social. There are some animals that are social. They like to be in a group. They don't like to be alone. Some animals are gregarious. Others are solitary. both in the classes which are furnished with feet and those which have wings or fins. Some partake of both characters, of those that are gregarious as well as those that are solitary. Some unite in societies, and some are scattered. If you take an animal that likes to live in society, in a group with other animals, and you try to separate it, the animal will never be happy. It wants to live in a group. If you try to separate an animal, take cows, for example. If you try to separate a cow from a herd when it's been raised in the pasture with all the other cows, it'll break out of the barn to get back with the other cows. Same is true with pigs. Same is true with sheep. They won't like to be alone. Sheep especially. No one raises one sheep like a dog. You know, a dog can be content living alone. Sheep don't live alone. They're gregarious. They like to be in society. Gregarious birds, birds that like to live with other birds are such as the pigeon, a stork, a swan. But no bird with hooked claws is gregarious. Can you think of a bird with hooked claws?
Eagle.
Yeah, eagle, falcon, hawk. They're not gregarious. You don't go outside and see a flock of hawks, right? You ever see a flock of hawks? When you see a hawk, you see one hawk up in the sky by itself flying around. What?
I know something that stays by itself.
What?
Crows.
Crows stay by themselves? Is that true?
Yeah, they fight.
Well, hold on. It's what it says here. It gives us a clue, right? It gives us a clue. It says, no bird with hooked claws is gregarious. So we might not necessarily know if it's actually a solitary bird or a gregarious bird, but he gives us a rule to look for. He says if it has hooked claws, it's solitary. All right? And we can think of examples of birds with hooked claws. Eagles, hawks, falcons, right? We have plenty of birds like that here. No bird with hooked claws is gregarious. So those nasty predator birds like hawks and eagles, they have no interest in a crowd or in society. They live by themselves. Maybe that's what you know how America uses the eagle as a symbol of America? Maybe that's the idea, that it's like independent and free, right? I don't know, maybe. No bird with hooked claws is gregarious. Among swimming animals, some fish are gregarious. And he gives a list, and these names are unfamiliar. One problem with studying animals and plants is it's very difficult to translate the names of plants and fish. I mean, plants and animals. You know? So matching animals in a book we read, like Aristotle's Animals or Theophrastus's Plants, and trying to figure out which animal he's actually referring to in English, that's very difficult work. So we're not going to spend a lot of time trying to figure out what bird is he talking about, what fish is he talking about. That can be very difficult. Some of them will be easy for us. Some of them are really difficult to understand. We'll have to rely on descriptions that he gives us to try to figure out what he's talking about. And if he gives us no description, it's often very hard to figure out what animal it is, right? So that's really not what matters. What he says here that is important is that some fish are gregarious. They always like to be in a school. And you've seen videos underwater in the ocean, right? You've seen where there's these giant crowds of fish that move around together. Have you ever seen that? They actually swim together and move all as one, even though it's a big crowd of fish. And so, you know, a group of fish is called a school of fish. If you ever hear of a school of fish, it means a multitude of fish. Okay, so birds can be gregarious. Birds can be solitary. Birds with hooked claws are always solitary. Swimming animals also can be gregarious or solitary. So the reason why that's important is because when you meet a new animal, if there's an animal you want to study and learn about, one of the things that you should consider is whether it's gregarious or whether it's solitary. If you want to keep animals, you should consider whether they're gregarious or solitary. All right? So remember that in natural philosophy, we study to understand the order of nature, and one of the reasons why we want to know the order of nature is so that we can actually manage nature and take care of nature and do things that are wise and good. We have to understand the nature of different animals. Some people just sit around and they think about animals they'd like to own. And they don't even know what those animals are like. They just look at a picture and they say, oh, look at that dog. He's so cute. That's the kind of dog I want. And they don't even think about what kind of dog it is, what that dog was created for, what the behavior of that dog is, and so on. They think that they're going to live in a small little city in an apartment and have, an English shepherd. And they're going to learn the hard way that that's not going to work, right? Or a Great Pyrenees because they're, it's so big and fluffy and I want to cuddle it. Yeah, well, that's a sheepdog. That thing's going to be all over the place, right? Those dogs are made to live on giant pastures. They're not meant to live in an apartment. So we have to understand what the characters of animals are so that we can keep them reasonably. And it's best for us to learn the nature of things and then to put them where they belong, not try to force them into some unnatural situation. We've had bad experiences with animals before where we thought we had a good idea and the animal didn't agree with us. And it doesn't matter what you do, that animal has 24 hours a day to break loose. And you're not going to keep it contrary to nature, right? So when we meet new animals, we can start looking at different characteristics. One of the characteristics is whether they're gregarious or social, or whether they like to be solitary and they're content to be alone. There are gregarious birds, there are gregarious fish, and so on. Paragraph 11, man, what about man? How does man compare and contrast? Oops, got an error on my page. How does man compare to these animals? We read in paragraph 11, man partakes of both qualities. Both qualities. Those which have a common employment are called social. But that is not the case with all gregarious animals. Man, like the bee and the wasp and the ant and the stork, belong to this class. Some of these obey a leader. Some are anarchical. That means they have no leader. Anarchical. Anarchy means people believe there should be no government, no leaders. Everyone is just free. Some are anarchical. The stork and the bee are examples of animals that obey a leader. The ant and many others are anarchical. They work with no leader. They just do their thing. I think my book might have gotten interrupted here. Some animals, let me see if I can change this page. Yeah, let me refresh this book real quick. 1 second. Okay. In paragraph 11, some animals are gregarious and solitary and are limited to one locality, one place. So some animals always stay in the same place. Some animals are migratory. What do you think that means? What?
Migrate.
They migrate, yeah, it's in migratory, right? But what does that mean? What does it mean to migrate? What does it mean?
Like move around.
They move from place to place. Why do they move? Because the seasons change, usually, right? When it's warm, when the summer comes, they can move up north. When it's cold, they'll move down south. Birds fly south for the winter, all right? So some animals are migratory, some stay in one place. Think about animals that hibernate, right? Animals that hibernate, even though they can't live in the weather when the weather changes, they don't go to another place, right? Like bears. The bears don't all just move south for the winter. What do? They just go to sleep for the winter, right? Snakes hibernate. lots of animals hibernate. They stay in one place when the seasons change. Other animals move to a different location. They're migratory. There are also carnivorous animals. Carnivorous. So animals eat different kinds of foods. Carnivorous means they eat meat. Carnivorous, carnis, right? Caro factum est in Latin reading. Carnis means meat, flesh. Carnivorous, flesh-eating animals. Herbivorous, that means they eat herbs, plants, all right? Cows are herbivores. They eat plants. Sheep, goats are herbivores. Others are called omnivorous because they eat everything. People, right? We eat meat, we eat plants, we eat everything. Fruit, nuts, rocks, coins, everything. Others eat peculiar food. Others eat one specific food, like a bee and a spider. The bee eats only honey and a few other sweet things. Spiders prey upon flies. That's their specific food, peculiar food. There are other animals which feed entirely on fish. They eat only fish. Some animals hunt for their food. Some make a store of their food. Some store up food. Think of squirrels, right? Squirrels gather nuts and they'll gather up a store of nuts. Some animals store their food. Some animals don't store their food. They just go out and hunt for it. There are some animals which make habitations for themselves. Some animals build themselves houses. Can you think of an animal that builds itself a house? Beavers, right? They actually build themselves a house.
Ants too, right?
Ants, yeah, we see ants. Right? It seems like, we can compare that to building a house, right? They prepare themselves a place. Okay? Some animals build themselves houses, habitations. Others do not. The mole, the mouse, the ant, and the bee make habitations or houses for themselves. Many kinds of insects and quadrupeds, four-footed animals, make no house for themselves. Can you think of an animal that doesn't make a house for itself?
Horses.
Yeah, dogs, right?
I know one.
What?
Deer.
Deer don't make a house for themselves. Okay, so some animals make houses for themselves. A bird makes a nest. But some animals,
Some dogs make dens. Like
do
walls
they?
and stuff. Yeah.
They'll actually prepare a place to live. Yeah. Okay, so some animals make habitations for themselves. Some don't. What?
Wild dogs with captive.
Wild dogs? Do you think that maybe domestic dogs, like family dogs, you think maybe they don't make houses just because we don't give them a chance? Like if we just left the dog to itself, maybe it would kind of make its own house. I know our dogs won't. I mean, you see what they do out they just tear the place apart, right? So we don't know. Maybe domestic dogs would make houses for themselves, but we just don't give them the chance because we just give them a house or put them in a kennel or something like that. All right? So again, whether they make themselves houses or not is another characteristic to look at. Whether what they eat is another characteristic to look at. Are they carnivores? Are they herbivores? Are they omnivorous? Do they eat both plants and animals? Do they make houses for themselves? That's another characteristic to think about when we compare and contrast different animals. All right? Paragraph 12. With regard to situation, some are troglodyte. Troglodyte. And I'm not going to tell you what that means. I want you to think about what it means based on what we read here. Ready? Think about what it means to be troglodyte. Okay? Some are troglodyte, as lizards and serpents. Lizards and serpents are troglodyte. Try to think about what does it mean. But listen to the rest of the paragraph. Ready? And let me just say something. When you study, you're always going to find vocabulary words that you don't know, right? And one of the skills you have to develop, I'm going to write VIC. One of the skills you have to develop as you read and study It's called learning vocabulary in context. Vocabulary in context. And what that means is you don't just go run and grab a dictionary every time you see a word that's new. You don't have to do that. Usually, if you just read the passage, there are clues that can help you to understand what the word means. You can learn the vocabulary in context. You can learn what it means by just continuing to read. All right? So let's use this as an example of looking at vocabulary in context. We have this word troglodyte, and we have no idea what it means. Hold on. Let's read the rest of the paragraph, and we'll see if we can figure out what it means. Ready? Some animals are troglodyte, such as lizards and serpents. Others, such as the horse and the dog, live upon the surface of the earth. So what we know about troglodyte, we don't know what it means, but we know that it doesn't mean to live upon the surface of the earth. Right? So what do you think it means?
Live under
To live under the earth. Okay? Now, to do what we just did, that's an example of vocabulary in context. Okay? We can't even say for sure at this point that that's what it means. But we know that it doesn't mean to live upon the surface of the earth. Okay? So that's a good example of vocabulary in context. So as you see words in these readings, especially in philosophy and natural history, you're going to see tons of words that you've never seen before. You can't run to a dictionary every single time. Sometimes it's helpful, especially if you got a computer open and you can just quickly Google a word and get a general meaning for it. That might be all you need. But you can often figure out what the word means by just continuing to read. Okay, so some animals are troglodyte as lizards and serpents. Others live upon the surface of the earth, like the horse and the dog. Some kinds of animals burrow in the ground. Some kind of animals burrow into the ground, others do not. Some animals are nocturnal. Do you know what nocturnal means? You know what nocturnal means? Some animals are nocturnal. You don't know what it means? What should you do to figure out what it means? Just keep reading, right? Just keep reading. So we have this word nocturnal. Some animals are nocturnal, such as the owl and the bat. Others, some animals are nocturnal, like the owl and the bat. Others, who are different, use the hours of daylight. So what does nocturnal mean? They act at night. Whatever they do at night. So nocturnal means that they are active at night. Other animals live and act during the daylight hours. Can you think of another nocturnal animal? They said owl and bat. Can you think of another one?
The little pigs. Like little pigs that are kind of wild pigs.
Wild pigs are active at night.
No, it's kind
Can you think of simpler, more common? What's an animal you know is active at night that's not active during the day? Possums, raccoons, right? Skunks. There are lots of nocturnal animals, all right?
wolves. They hunt.
Well, that's kind of true. I mean, we hear coyotes are active at night. We don't see coyotes during the day, right? So animals that are nocturnal. What's important is you see how we're learning characteristics to pay attention to when we study animals. Okay? What happens when you see a raccoon in the day? What do people say? It probably has a problem, right? There's probably something wrong with it. Because we know that it's nocturnal, and we see it during the day, we know something's wrong. It's not natural. Say that again? Or its home was destroyed, and it's just kind of like wandering lost? Yeah. But you see how that helps us to make a judgment about an animal. That animal's not supposed to be out in the middle of the day. Something's wrong. Okay? So we see what nocturnal means. It means active at night. Other animals use the hours of daylight. There are tame animals and wild animals. Tame animals and wild animals. Man is a tame animal. Some men, right? I don't think every man is tame. But man, generally speaking, are tame animals. A mule is a tame animal. The leopard and the wolf are invariably wild. That means you cannot tame them. You cannot make them tame because it is not their nature to be tame. You can't make a wolf tame. People often think that they could. Like, oh, if I got a wolf when it was just a pup and I raised it and took care of it, I could raise it to be my pet wolf. But you can't because its nature is to be wild. You know? And you're going to learn that things actually have a nature. They're not just controlled by how people take care of them. They actually have a nature. And as human beings, we're not supposed to try to control nature. We're supposed to learn the order of nature and just take care of it, right? So if we find a baby wolf, what are we supposed to do to it? We're not supposed to bring it home and, well, you say shoot it, but we're supposed to return it to its natural place, right? We're supposed to put it where it belongs and keep it there, not think that we can just make it different, because that's not true. All right. The leopard and the wolf are invariably wild. Others, like the elephant, are easily tamed. Easily tamed. We may, however, view them in another way. For all the genera that have been tamed, all of the different kinds of animals that have been tamed also are found wild, such as horses, oxen, swine, sheep, goats, and dogs. So it's not that simple necessarily. Like you mentioned wild dogs. Does that mean dogs that just haven't been tamed? Or is that a different kind of dog that is wild and cannot be tamed? Right? So that's a different question. All right? Paragraph 13. Some animals utter a loud cry. Some animals make howling like coyotes, right? They utter a loud cry, or like a rooster. Others are silent. Other animals have a voice, which in some cases may be expressed by a word, and in others it cannot. There are also noisy animals and silent animals. There are musical animals and unmusical animals. But they are mostly noisy about the breeding season. So for most animals, their noisiness has to do with breeding and reproduction. Some animals, like the dove, frequent fields. That means they spend a lot of time in fields. Others, such as the hoopoe, live on the mountains. Some attach themselves to man, such as the pigeon. The pigeon actually likes to be raised and kept by men. Some are lascivious, such as the partridge, and domestic fowl. That means your chickens, okay? Lascivious. We have to learn what this word lascivious means. From context, some animals are lascivious, like the partridge and domestic fowl. Others are chaste. So lascivious is the opposite of chaste. Lascivious means they just breed with each other, right? There's no husbands and wives. We don't have chicken marriages on the farm. The rooster just breeds with all of the hens. The bull breeds with all of the cows. That's what it means to be lascivious. Okay? Some animals are chaste. Aristotle says the raven rarely has sexual relations. The raven, he says, is a chaste animal. Interesting, huh? Paragraph 14. There are classes of animals furnished with weapons of offense. There are classes of animals furnished with weapons of offense, and other animals furnished with weapons of defense. In the former, animals with weapons of offense, I include animals which are capable of inflicting injury or of defending themselves when they're attacked. In the group of animals with defensive weapons, Aristotle says he includes those that are provided with some natural protection against injury. So a turtle has protection against injury, but a turtle doesn't attack with its shell, right? What?
Porcupine.
Porcupines, do they attack with those? They attack with those spikes, don't they? They like shoot them, don't they? I think they do. I think they can actually use them to attack. But they usually don't do that unless they're threatened, you know? Snakes, too. Like, snakes usually don't attack. They usually respond when they're threatened. What did you say? Skunks, yeah, they definitely have a weapon. So some actually attack, like predators, tigers and lions, they actually attack, right? Others are simply defensive. And we can think of lots of examples of that, all right? Paragraph 15. I'm going to have to take a second here and reload my book. Paragraph 15. Animals also exhibit many differences of disposition. I find this really interesting. Animals exhibit differences of disposition. Some are gentle. Some are peaceful. Some animals are not violent, like the ox. The ox is peaceful. Some animals are violent and passionate and intractable, like a wild boar. And we've never seen a wild boar, but we've seen some pigs that could be pretty nasty, right? Especially when it's time to load them for the butcher. So the wild boar is violent and passionate. That's its disposition. Some are prudent. Some are prudent and fearful. Some animals are careful. If you try to get the animal to come to you, it won't, because it knows to be careful, such as the deer and the rabbit. They're always fearful. Aristotle says that they're prudent. It's like they're wise and they know to be careful. Serpents are illiberal and crafty. Serpents are crafty. Others, such as the lion, are liberal, noble, and generous. Others are brave, wild, and crafty like the wolf. There is this difference between the generous and the brave. The generous means that which comes of a noble race. The latter, the brave, that which does not easily depart from its own nature. So there are different dispositions, different personalities of animals. Some animals are cunning and evil disposed, as the fox, evil. Others, such as the dog, are fierce but friendly. That's what's kind of scary about dogs, right? They can be friendly, but at the same time, they can kill people. Some are gentle and easily tamed, like the elephant. Some are susceptible of shame and watchful, like the goose. Some are jealous, like the peacock. But man is the only animal capable of reasoning. Man is the only animal capable of reasoning, though many other animals possess the faculty of memory and instruction in common with man. Many animals can learn, many animals have memory, but only man can reason. No other animal but man has the power of recollection. So memory and recollection are two different things. You can think about what the difference is. In another place, we'll treat more accurately of the disposition and manner of animals in each class. So we're going to get into all of this in more detail, and that brings us to the end of chapter 1. So this is just introductory. There's a lot to think about. We're learning characteristics of animals that we can use to compare and contrast animals, to separate animals into different classes, but this is just introductory. We're just making observations and talking casually about different characteristics of animals. Obviously, we've got to get into a lot more detail to learn about these characteristics, these different classifications, dispositions, and so on, and we're going to do that in future chapters. Now, I want you to notice, though, that Aristotle, as an ancient Greek living 350 years before Christ, the Greeks understood that human beings are different than all other animals. Aristotle understood that human beings are the only animals capable of reasoning. We learn that in catechism. We learn that man is a rational animal. He's the only animal created in the image of God with a soul, with understanding and free will. The ancient Greeks knew that man was different. Sometimes in our generation, it seems that men today don't believe that people are different. Right? It almost is like we're trying to argue that men are just one more kind of animal, but that's not true. The ancient Greeks, wise men, even if they weren't Christian, have always known that men are not like animals. Men have important differences that make them superior to the animals. And the difference that makes man most superior is his ability to reason. No other animal can reason. So that brings us to the end of chapter 1. Lots of information, lots that we could talk about and think about. But you see what Aristotle's doing, right? He's just talking about characteristics of animals that we can use to begin studying and learning about all of the different animals. So take some time in your notes, write a brief summary of what we studied in chapter 1, and that's all for our first lesson in Aristotle's History of Animals.